welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're gonna be walking on the wild side, exploring the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
From a perspective you won't find in a textbook.
That's right.
And to guide us, we have a former police officer who's now a criminal defense attorney. So, talk about an insider's view, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating material, and it's all about practicality, street smarts, and legal strategy. We're going to dive in how the system really works.
Okay.
So hopefully you can make good choices and avoid any unwanted trouble.
Right. All right. So no boring legal jargon here. We're getting straight to the point.
Yeah.
Our source kicks off with a golden rule.
Right.
I love this. If cops can't see you, they can't arrest you. It seems almost too simple.
Right.
Is there more to it?
There's a lot more to it. So you want to think about it as minimizing your exposure, especially during what we call crook time, between midnight and 4 a.m.
Okay.
That's when police are most active. Most law-abiding citizens are home asleep, so
unless you're a night owl or you have some legitimate reason to be out,
yeah.
staying in is the safest bet.
Yeah, exactly. Just reducing the chances of even encountering law enforcement. But the art of invisibility, it goes beyond just, being in the right place at the right time. It's also blending in.
Okay, this is where the concept of incongruity comes in, right?
Yeah.
Our source talks about how looking at a place
Yes.
can draw unwanted attention, and he gives a pretty vivid example.
Yeah.
A guy in a tuxedo walking along the docks at midnight.
Yeah.
Talk about sticking out.
That's a great example, of how something seemingly harmless can trigger a police officer's suspicion. They're trained to notice things that are out of the ordinary.
Right.
Things that just don't add up. And that triggers their instincts to investigate.
So if I'm cruising through a wealthy neighborhood in a beat-up car, that might raise a few eyebrows.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the car you drive, your clothing, even your behavior can contribute to what our source calls your arrestability quotient. Or AQ, it's not profiling based on race or any other protected characteristic, but it is about behaviors and patterns that police associate with criminal activity.
That's interesting. So it's more about fitting a certain profile that makes you a target.
Think of it like this. Police officers develop a sixth sense, really from years of experience dealing with criminals. They notice patterns in behavior, dress, the types of cars associated with certain activities. It's all about reading these subtle cues.
So even if I'm not doing anything illegal, but I fit a certain profile.
Right.
Let's say I'm driving a car that's seen better days. That could increase my chances of getting stopped.
Precisely. And that's why understanding how police perceive these cues is so crucial,
Right.
Yeah.
So let's say, despite our best efforts to blend in, we do find ourselves face-to-face with a police officer.
Right.
What's the best way to handle that interaction?
That's where the psychology of police encounters comes into play. Our source calls it the custody contest. Essentially, who wins the psychological battle?
Oh, yeah.
You or the officer?
Okay, so it's a mental game.
Absolutely. And the key to winning is, surprisingly, to lose.
Okay.
At least in the psychological sense. You want to be respectful, even submissive, but without losing your dignity.
Okay.
You have to remember, police officers are in a position of authority. Challenging that is only going to escalate things.
Right, so being argumentative or confrontational is a bad idea.
Definitely. You want to demonstrate that you understand they're in charge, even if you don't agree with why you've been stopped.
Right.
It's about staying calm, composed, and avoiding any actions that could be perceived as threatening or disrespectful.
Okay, so I'm pulled over, I'm staying calm, I'm being respectful.
Right.
What are the magic words? What are the magic words to use here?
Here's a phrase that can make a world of difference.
Okay.
Officer, have I done something wrong?
It sounds so simple. Why is that so effective?
Well, it is simple, and it's polite, but most importantly, it's a question. By phrasing it this way, you're subtly shifting the power dynamic.
Okay.
You're not passively accepting their authority. You're engaging them in a dialogue.
Right.
And it forces the officer to articulate why they've stopped you.
So it's a way of gathering information without being confrontational.
Exactly. You're getting them to explain their actions, which can be helpful later on. And once you've asked that question, here's the most important part. Shut up.
Wait, really? Don't try to explain myself or defend my actions?
Resist the urge. Anything you say can and will be used against you, even if you're innocent.
Right.
Remember, the goal is to avoid arrest and deal with the situation legally,
Right.
not to win an argument on the street.
So silence is golden.
In this case, absolutely.
Okay.
This is especially important if the officer starts using what our source calls insiders.
Insiders, what are those?
Well, they're tactics designed to get you to react emotionally
Right.
and make a mistake. It could be yelling, making subtle threats, even using insults. The goal is to provoke you into running,
Right.
resisting, or saying something incriminating.
So even if the officer is being unfair or using these insiders,
Yes.
I should just stay silent.
As much as possible, yes.
Yeah.
It might feel incredibly frustrating, but remember, you're playing a long game here.
Right.
Stay calm, stay silent, and protect your rights.
Okay, I've managed to stay calm. I've used the magic words. I've resisted the urge to argue. What typically happens next?
Well, the officer might ask some basic questions like your name, address, where you're going, things like that. Answer truthfully and briefly, but don't volunteer any extra information.
Okay, and if they ask about something I don't want to answer, like whether I've been arrested before.
That's when you invoke your right to remain silent. You don't have to talk. And it's not a crime to refuse to answer questions. It might make the officer suspicious, but it's much better than saying something that could be used against you later.
Okay, this is all great advice, but it's a lot to remember under pressure.
Sure.
Is there anything else that can help in these situations?
That's where street cards come in.
Oh, yeah.
They're like a secret weapon in navigating these encounters.
Sounds intriguing,
Yeah.
but we're going to have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, everyone, because we're just getting started. Welcome back to our deep dive into the criminal justice system. I'm ready to learn more about these street cards you mentioned.
Yeah, they're a game changer, really.
Yeah.
Think of them as personalized credentials that you create
Okay.
and carry with you.
Okay, so more than just a business card.
Way more.
Okay.
Yeah. It includes your basic information, name, address, contact info for someone you trust, even your lawyer's information.
Hold on, why would I put my lawyer's information on there?
Well, it sends a message to the officer, like, hey, I'm not messing around.
Right?
I'm aware of my rights and I have legal representation. It's subtle, but powerful. A psychological deterrent.
I see. It's like saying I'm not going to be easily intimidated or tricked.
Exactly. It also helps you stay calm and collected.
Right.
Because you have a plan.
Right.
What else might you include on a street card?
Well, if it's about showing I'm a responsible person, maybe my school,
Yeah.
my employer, even my place of worship.
Yeah.
Things that tie me to the community.
That's the idea. It's all information that's publicly available already, but you're presenting it
Right.
in a way that emphasizes your positive standing.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's perfectly legal to do this.
So let's say I get stopped by the police. How do I use this street card effectively?
Well, when asked for ID, you present your driver's license
Right.
and the street card together.
Oh,
You can say something like, "Officer, I'd like to give you my credentials."
okay.
And always remember to ask permission before reaching for your wallet
Okay.
or your purse.
What if they get angry? Or refuse to read it?
You stay calm,
Right.
Stay polite.
Mm-hmm.
If they ask what it is, you simply explain, "Well, I wanted to be prepared in case I was ever stopped by the police."
Okay.
That's it.
It's almost like taking control of the situation
Uh-huh.
without being confrontational.
That's exactly what it is.
Right.
It's proactive.
Right.
A way to protect yourself and potentially de-escalate the encounter.
Okay, onto a topic that gets a lot of people into trouble.
Yeah.
Drugs.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway here?
Keep them at home.
Right.
Yeah. Your house is one of the few places where the police can't easily search
Right.
without a warrant.
Makes sense. So why is this so important, especially for listeners who might be younger?
Well, drug possession, especially marijuana, it's one of the most common reasons for arrests,
Uh-huh.
particularly for young people. And cars are like Easter eggs to police officers.
Easter eggs. That's an interesting way to put it.
They see cars as these potential treasure troves of illegal activity.
Right.
They don't know what's inside until they look. And the Uniform Traffic Code gives them a wide range of reasons to pull you over.
So any minor infraction could potentially lead to a search.
Exactly. A broken taillight, an expired registration, even driving too slowly can be used as justification.
Oh, wow.
And remember, if they find something in your car, even if it doesn't belong to you, you're the one in trouble.
Right. Our source tells a story about a young woman who had drugs left in her car by a friend.
Yeah,
And she ended up fleeing the state for a year
right.
because she was afraid of getting arrested.
That's a crazy story. It highlights the importance of being extra careful, especially if you lend your car to anybody.
Which is something we should avoid doing anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So
Never lend your car to anyone, especially if they're not listed on your insurance.
Right.
The risks are just too high.
Okay, and speaking of high-risk situations, let's talk about what happens when a traffic stop escalates.
Sure.
Beyond a routine check.
Yeah.
You mean like a felony stop? Our source uses that term
Uh-huh.
to describe a more serious encounter.
Yeah, exactly. This is when police have reason to believe
Right.
you've committed a serious crime.
Okay.
Maybe your car matches the description of one used in a robbery,
Right.
or they suspect you're involved in something more serious.
Okay, so the stakes are much higher.
Absolutely. It's a high-tension situation. You need to be extremely careful, pull over immediately, follow all instructions, keep your hands visible
Right.
on the steering wheel. Don't make any sudden movements or reach for anything unless you're instructed.
Got it. So what about talking to the police in this situation?
You'll still need to provide your name
Right.
and basic information.
Okay.
But beyond that, it's crucial to invoke your right to remain silent and ask for a lawyer. Remember, anything you say can be used against you, and police officers are trained to ask questions that can trip you up, even if you are innocent.
It sounds like shut up and lawyer up is the best strategy.
It really is.
Okay.
The stakes are just too high to risk saying something
Right.
that could incriminate you.
Okay. So let's move on to another nerve-wracking aspect of police encounters. Vehicle searches.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to say we should always refuse. Really?
You catching on.
Okay.
Yeah, especially if you have any reason to believe there
Yeah.
might be something in your car that could get you in trouble. You know, refusing a search protects your rights.
Uh-huh.
It makes it much harder for the police to justify their actions.
But can't they just search anyway if they have probable cause?
They can, but refusing a search forces them to articulate their reasons,
Right.
which can expose any illegal or unethical tactics
Right.
they might be using. It also strengthens your legal defense later on, you know?
Right.
If they find something without your consent, it's much easier to challenge that evidence in court.
What if they try to pressure me or use a tactic like an inventory search to get around my refusal?
They might try that. They might claim, they're documenting the contents of your car for liability reasons.
Yeah.
But it's often just a way to circumvent your refusal. That's why knowing your rights and standing your ground is so important.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But what if, despite my best efforts, I'm about to get arrested? Are there any last-ditch strategies we can try?
There are a few emergency procedures, as our source calls them.
Okay.
But remember, these are for minor offenses,
Okay.
not serious crimes.
So what are they? Tell me everything.
Well, for starters, you can always ask for a notice to appear.
Okay.
This means you're summoned to court,
Right.
but not immediately arrested. It
Yeah.
might work for things like, possession of small amounts of drugs or,
Yeah.
minor offenses. You avoid that whole jail and booking process.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are there any other tactics? Our source hinted at some more creative approaches.
Let's just say, tears, sincere apologies.
Oh, wow.
And even a sudden bout of nausea
Okay.
have been known to diffuse a tense situation.
Wait, are you serious?
It might sound crazy, but, appealing to the officer's human side
Right.
can sometimes de-escalate things. It's not a guaranteed solution, but if you're facing a minor charge, it might be worth a shot.
Okay.
And honestly, the most important thing is to simply be aware of your surroundings
Right.
and avoid risky situations
Right.
whenever possible.
Okay, that's a good reminder for us all. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Our source emphasizes the importance of reading your mail.
Okay.
You'd be surprised how many people end up with warrants
Okay.
because they missed a court date or ignored a notice.
Guilty as charged. I definitely let the mail pile up sometimes.
Don't let it be something important from the court.
Okay.
That could literally land you in jail. And while we're talking about avoiding trouble, it's important to understand the limitations of radar detectors.
I thought those were supposed to help you avoid speeding tickets.
Well, they can help, but they're not foolproof.
Yeah.
Police have technology to get around them, like laser speed detection, and they often position themselves strategically
Right.
to catch speeders regardless of radar detectors. And then, your car itself
Right.
can attract attention.
How so?
How you drive, the type of car you have, even how it looks. These can all make you more visible to law enforcement. Think of your car as a giant reflector, sending out signals that can either attract or deter attention.
Okay, this has been an eye-opening conversation. I'm definitely feeling more informed, but also a little overwhelmed
Ooh.
by all this information.
It's a lot to take in.
Right.
But remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand how the criminal justice system works,
Right.
the better equipped you are to stay safe.
This has been incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Let's continue this deep dive in the next part.
Okay.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground,
We have.
from the art of invisibility to understanding how police think. I feel so much more aware, but also realizing how easily things can go wrong, even if you're trying to do everything right.
It's true. Yeah, the system can be complex and unforgiving.
Right.
And that's why we're wrapping up this deep dive with one of the most crucial elements, the role of a lawyer.
Okay, so far we've been focusing on avoiding those encounters with law enforcement altogether.
Right.
But let's face it, sometimes things happen.
Exactly. And when they do, having a good lawyer on your side
Yeah.
can make all the difference.
A lot of people might think, well, I can just represent myself.
Right.
Is that ever a good idea?
Well, you technically have the right to represent yourself,
Right.
but it's rarely advisable, especially if you're facing serious charges.
Right.
Lawyers bring years of expertise,
Yeah.
a deep understanding of the legal system.
So it's more than just having someone to speak for you in court.
Absolutely. A good lawyer is your advocate, your strategist, and your guide
Right.
through the entire legal process. They can help you from the moment you're arrested,
Right.
advising you on your rights, negotiating with prosecutors, building a strong defense.
It sounds like they're almost like interpreters,
Yeah,
helping you to understand the language
yeah.
and the nuances of the law.
That's a great way to put it. They can help you navigate a system
Yeah.
that can feel confusing and overwhelming.
Okay, so finding a good lawyer is clearly important.
Mm-hmm.
But what about all the paperwork that comes with? Just simply driving, licenses, registration, insurance. It can be a lot to keep track of.
That's where our source suggests something called car cards.
Oh,
It's a simple but effective way to stay organized
okay.
and prepared.
Are those like the street cards we talked about earlier, but specifically for your vehicle?
Exactly. Think of it as like a folder
Right.
or an envelope that contains all the essential documents for your car. Your driver's license, registration, insurance card, even copies of any prescriptions you might have. Having everything in one place
Yeah.
can really streamline any interactions
Right.
with law enforcement.
So it's about being proactive and avoiding any unnecessary suspicion.
Right. If you're fumbling around for these documents during a traffic stop, it can make you look nervous
Right.
or like you're trying to hide something.
Right.
A car card shows you're prepared,
Uh-huh.
responsible, which can help de-escalate the situation.
These are such great tips. It's all about minimizing risk and taking control where you can.
Speaking of minimizing risk, our source has some interesting advice on what to do if you ever find a gun,
Okay.
which, believe it or not, happens more often than you might think.
Okay, so let's say I'm walking down the street and I stumble upon a gun. What's the first thing I should do?
Do not touch it.
Okay.
Call the police immediately
Okay.
and report your findings.
But what if I'm worried about, like, getting involved or being questioned?
It's understandable to feel that way,
Right.
but it's the safest and most responsible course of action.
Okay.
Touching the gun could contaminate evidence or even put you at risk.
Right.
Simply explain the situation to the police calmly and honestly
Yeah.
when they arrive.
And what about the temptation to keep it? Like, maybe thinking I'm protecting myself.
That's a dangerous path to go down.
Okay.
Possessing an illegal firearm is a serious crime,
Okay.
even if you found it. Always err on the side of caution
Right.
and let law enforcement handle the situation.
Okay. Message received loud and clear. Call the police. Don't touch the gun.
Exactly.
Any other final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Our source has one final piece of advice, especially for parents.
Okay.
Be vigilant about what's in your kids' cars. Teenagers often don't realize the consequences of leaving things like drugs or alcohol in their vehicles. And if they get pulled over, you, as the car owner, could be held responsible.
So even if it's not my stuff, I could get in trouble.
It's your car, your insurance,
Right.
and ultimately your responsibility.
Right.
It's always a good idea to have a conversation with your kids
Uh-huh.
about the importance of keeping their car clean, literally and legally.
Wow. This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the criminal justice system from a perspective you rarely hear.
Uh-huh.
And I feel so much more prepared
Yeah.
to navigate it safely.
The biggest takeaway for me is that knowledge truly is power.
Yeah,
By understanding how the system works, you can protect yourself, exercise your rights,
right.
and hopefully avoid unnecessary trouble.
Absolutely. And remember, this information isn't about encouraging illegal activity.
Right.
It's about empowering you to make smart choices, stay safe,
Yeah.
and protect yourself within the existing system.
It does raise a bigger question, though. If seemingly minor infractions can lead to such serious consequences,
Right.
shouldn't we be looking at ways to reform the system itself
Right.
to make it more just and equitable?
That's a huge topic, one that deserves its own deep dive. But for now, we've given you the tools and the knowledge to navigate the current reality.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the criminal justice system. Stay safe out there.